Welcome back. My name is Scott McGurn. This is the third video in a series on sex and marriage. We've looked at a lot of history. We've looked at what was marriage, what has marriage been all the way around the world, every culture, religion, nation, island, you name it. And we've looked at birth control, the effects that it's had. Since it's become widespread back in the 60s and 70s, it's been about 50 years. Now, one thing I want to ask in this video is, was mankind, humankind, whatever you want to call it, were we ready for birth control? Now, most people would say yes, but bear in mind, there's a critical point to remember. We didn't evolve into birth control. Okay, science invented birth control. Science invented the hydrogen bomb. Science invented birth control. Not because it was going to make the world a better place. Science invents things because scientists are paid to do so. They are paid a huge amount of money by the military-industrial complex to invent the hydrogen bomb and many other pieces of military equipment. Scientists were paid to invent birth control by the pharmaceutical industry. It's interesting to note that the pharmaceutical industry has made more money off of birth control than the military-industrial complex has made off of the hydrogen bomb. That's a fascinating and deeply ironic thing. None of these things were invented for our benefit. These are invented and then science will study the after effects. Now, science has been studying the after effect of birth control, the collapse of the family unit, the fact that we no longer have long-term meaningful relationships, and it goes on and on and on. What has the effect been on young men being raised without fathers, not knowing one actual father figure in their lives, despite the fact that they live in cities with millions of people? There are men's groups all across North America where men are trying to figure out what does it actually mean to be a man, and does a man have a role in society? He's obviously not going to be the breadwinner, he's not going to be the disciplinarian, he's not going to be the king of his household, he's not going to own a farm, he's not going to produce anything. When he asks his doctor about it, he's told that he really needs to find a way to have joy without having a purpose in life. That in the future, men might not have a purpose, but they need to find peace and joy anyway in the absence of a purpose. Now, that's a terrible thing to say. We all need to have a purpose, but we need to reinvent our social psychology so that everyone can have a sense of purpose. Now, science has been researching the effects of birth control for the past 50 years. But if you're in therapy or you read the self-help books, you know that they haven't even scratched the surface of how much of an effect this is having on society. And it's not just social, it's economic. Economists would always tell us the family unit is the engine that fuels the economy. And that's true. But it's no longer there. So we don't really have an engine fueling the economy. So we are looking at a descent into a socio-economic catastrophe, and we're moving closer to it all the time. But that's for another video. Now, was mankind ready for this? I would say we would all agree mankind does not have the maturity level to deal with much of anything. We still have wars, we still have famine, we produce more than enough food to feed all of our people, but we still allow millions of children to starve to death. We allow millions of people to die from curable diseases that for $100 could be cured, but based on ego, we'd rather keep the $100 than save somebody else because we see them as separate, and the lower they are, the higher the ego feels, and the ego bases everything on comparison. If you haven't watched the series on ego, I recommend you do. It'll help you to understand this series and future series much more. The first video in the Ego series was called Trump's Ego and the Meaning of Life. That's the first of a 5-part series. I highly recommend it. Now, there are many potential alternatives to traditional marriage, to traditional relationships, but I have found that in our society, it's almost deemed politically incorrect to talk about them. It's very difficult to initiate a conversation. I'll give you an example. A lot of you out there are Trekkies. You're familiar with the Star Trek franchise and how many socially revolutionary ideas and technological ideas came out of that. Well, in one episode I was watching many years ago, it was on Star Trek Enterprise, the one where Dr. Phlox is the ship's doctor. He's from a planet called Denobula. And he was telling a young male crew member how in his world all the women have 3 husbands and all the men have 3 wives. Well, this young fellow was shocked. But as they went into the conversation, it came up, well, don't you miss your 3 wives? And the Denobulan doctor, Dr. Phlox, he said, yes, I do, but I also miss the husbands. And that was like a light bulb going off, a bit of an epiphany, you know. If we can get past petty jealousies as a species, and all of that comes from ego, if we can get rid of petty jealousies, there would be all manner of social constructs that could give us long-term relationships, deep, meaningful relationships. And if we can't discuss that, if we can't even discuss that, we're never going to make progress. So maybe in a future video, I'll make a list of these different things and you can write comments in the commentary below. That might be a very important thing for our species. Now, that being said, all the problems that we will ever have stem from the human ego. And more than anything else, I want to get that point across. Human ego is one source of all understanding. The other source is widely described as the Holy Spirit, but it's also described as enlightenment. It's also described as true love. True love, enlightenment, the Holy Spirit, think of those as all being interchangeable and the ego being the opposite. We will either base all of our thoughts on the ego or we'll base all of our thoughts on something else. It's very difficult to have both. We can move toward enlightenment, we can be very loving in what we do, but if we're still ruled by the ego, we're no further ahead. If we can get to the point where our source of understanding are the positive and not the negative, all of our problems can potentially be dealt with in a permanent and lasting way that allows us to have some semblance of happiness in our lives. Now, we all understand the concept of true love. That's probably the easiest to understand, maybe. Enlightenment's a little harder, and maybe to some of us who have a background, some bad experiences in organized religion, we hear the word holy, that's anathema, we don't want anything to do with it. So if you want to look at it as true love, look at it as true love. See the value of love versus the value of selfishness. See if you can tell the difference and see if true love is better, because it is attainable. We don't have to forfeit our hearts, our minds, and our souls. We don't have to sell out. We don't have to exploit everything that we are. We don't have to subjectify ourselves. We don't have to forfeit our humanity in order to participate in the rat race. We can maintain our dignity. Gandhi maintained his dignity under terrible circumstances. Many others have done the same. We can too. So I want to thank you for your time. I encourage you to share this video with others. If you like anything about it, please subscribe. That helps us to share it with many others. It's the only way to share it. That's why we're on YouTube. Thank you for your time. God bless.